Okay, welcome to the first edition of Against the Odds. My name is Oxaciano Salomon. I'm a coach, streamer, and showcaster for League of Legends, mainly in Latin America region, specifically Argentina. And in this section, that will be the only one in English in my YouTube channel, we're going to talk about different topics around the world, around LoL esports, around esports in Latin America. My objective is for the world to know Latin America as an esport region and how esports developed here. We can divide the periods of time in Latin America in three periods. The first period I will treat is the pre-esports era that founded the basis of esports in our region. Arcades were a characteristic of this era. In the late 1990s, many gaming players would go to an arcade to play fighting games. Was the most common. There was also a television program in Argentina called Nivel X that made some Daytona USA tournaments in those arcades. So there were like a spontaneous competition around those places where there was a competitive attitude, but the tournaments were not really organized, nor there was any prize for them. There were more like to hold the honor of being the champion, of being the best player in those arcades. Second part of the pre-era came with the cyber cafes. Around 2004, 2003, cyber cafes started to open all over Latin America, especially in Argentina and Peru. In these cyber cafes, introduced PC gaming to Latin America. That was mostly held by consoles between the late 1990s and 2004, more or less. In that part of the pre-esports era, Counter-Strike 1.6 was the game to be played, and also in some parts of Argentina and especially in Peru that continues to be a niche. To these days, Dota was played. There was also some World of Warcraft players among cyber cafes, but especially between the higher classes of societal income that could afford a broadband connection. That was not usual. The usual connection at that time were the first broadband connections, but mainly they connected with a modem to the internet. Also, the hardware was very poor at the time, nor was cheap. To be honest, it has never been cheap to buy hardware in Latin America, but especially at that time was really expensive, and the requirements to play games were too high for a middle-class family to buy a PC. Around 2008, it's the start of the semi-era in my division. The semi-professional era is characteristic because broadband internet connection appeared for residential use. The connection was around 3 and 6 megabytes per second. Still, we have poor hardware, and the thing is that it was an asymmetrical connection, so the upload connection was around 0.5 or 1 megabyte per second. So the semi-professional era is characteristic of competitions that were not streamed, but the professional tournaments were held. The first professional tournament we can find in Argentina in particular is the 2005 World Cyber Games qualifier that was held in Argentina for StarCraft, World of Warcraft. No representatives traveled to China to play the World Cyber Games, but they had poor results. Then in 2010, obviously League of Legends starts as a game. We as Latin Americans played in North America server because it was the closest one we had. Although conditions to play from Latin America to North America were poor. In South America, around 2010 and 2050 were the ping that we had at the time. So few players could exhibit their true potential in that ping. Although the awkward conditions, some players could be high on the ladder. The ladder at that time was counted in ELO. Around 1800 were the peak players of Latin America. In South America in particular, that was the worst region. The Latin Americans from Venezuela to Mexico had better conditions in North America. So we had the examples of the Venezuelan players that could mail LCS like Crumbs and Quas, but Latin America was not in a condition to show their talent in that era. Also, hardware doesn't help, so it was very difficult for players up until 2014 more or less to have a decent computer to play League of Legends. We were talking to a decent computer, we're talking about a computer that could maintain a frame rate of about 40 FPS in team fights. Many players didn't have that conditions. So we have hardware limitations to play in the first years of competitive League of Legends, in the born of League of Legends as a game. One anecdote of a player that was famously known between the Latin American players and maybe it reached North America as well was the case of El Reginaldo. El Reginaldo was a meme name in honor to Reginald, that was the mid laner of TSM at that time, but in many circumstances they ended up confronting themselves. Reginaldo is a player who still plays nowadays, is Argentine. So besides the awkward conditions, some players could be high up on the ladder. Some tournaments of League of Legends were held in the North American server throughout a forum that was called Coliseo Web at the time. The forum was, the owner was Javier España, that today is the content manager for Riot Latin America South in Esports. And these tournaments could gather some teams that were playing in North America with these awkward conditions to play a tournament only for Latin America. Then we jump to 2013, where Brazil and Latin America South server opened. Brazil opened first, but quickly after Latin America South opens as well. And we start to see the migration from players that played in NA to Latin America and the exponential growth of players from Latin America to this new game, to League of Legends. It was very common at the time and before that you were introduced to the game by a friend. At the exponential growth, I think that it was from the nostalgia from Dota that introduced the MOBA genre. So the exponential growth in Latin America was like natural. Still, we had better internet connections from 2008. Maybe the connections started to be in average like 12 megabytes per second or such, but the hardware was still expensive up until 2015 more or less. Still, you find cases in 2016 and 2017 of players that could not afford a good computer to play, and they were picking Challenger and they were not in competitive teams because of their hardware. So hardware has always been an issue in Latin America. Internet connection as well, but started to get better over time. So we are in 2013. 50 megabytes per second was an elite connection. Really was like a differential service. Really few people had this service, but the people that had this service started to stream different tournaments, and also with the regular connection also started to stream in very low quality, maybe 360, maybe 480, but tournaments started to happen. Also, Riot Games launched its professional series with the opening of the server. There were 2 series in Latin America South for 32 teams that were selected between the community and Riot Games. In Latin America North was about an open tournament with 256 teams, where the Latin America South champion was LoL Cave and the Latin America North champion was Lion Gaming, the most famous team of Latin America maybe. The two confronted themselves to see who reigned supreme in Latin America as well as a region, and Lion Gaming won that match 3-0. With the winning that match, they went to the first international wildcard qualifier that was held in 2013, where Latin America ended last in the competition. Obviously, as the first year with a server, Latin American teams weren't really about a strategy, but were friends that played together. There were no coaches at the time, at least for the first year. So Latin American team played hardly with compositions that were area of effect, change C abilities, or maybe an assassin that tried to get a couple of kills and take over the game. But there was little to no strategy in them. In 2014, Riot Games decided to change how leagues operated and expand the leagues all over Latin America, adding 4 competitive stops throughout the year. Still, the World Championship was held in October and November of that year, and the competitive stops were held throughout all the year. So you will earn points for winning each competitive stance. There were 3 qualifications and the finals at the end of the year. But as the World Championship was played before that, what Riot Games did is that the champion of the second competitive stop, that was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, was going to go to international qualifier with the Brazil representative. The first stop was in Chile, the second one in Buenos Aires, Argentina, as I said, the third one in Bogotá, Colombia, and the finals were held in Mexico. In the second competitive stop, PEX team won the tournament and went to compete with Kaboom, that was the representative from Brazil, for a place in the World Championship. PEX team could not win over Kaboom, over Lep's Kaboom. You all know the story in the World Championship about Kaboom and Lep. But the thing is that it was the first time that Latin America was known in the world scene, let's say, because Freak casted that series between PEX and Kaboom. And when Freak casted that series, the top laner that is called Mantarraya, in Spanish is pronounced like Mantarraya, so there are plenty of videos in YouTube like Freak saying Mantarraya, Mantarraya. It is really funny. Indeed, it is really fun. So PEX team was the first to let Latin America be known in the countries that speak English, although it could not qualify to the World Championship that year. Then the same PEX team was the finalist, where Lion Gaming reigned supreme again in Latin America for 2014. So although we didn't qualify for international championship, there was a champion in Latin America, and that was Lion Gaming. Again, 2015 brought changes with it in the competitive scene. The Latin America leagues were established, and Latin America was divided in 2 regions, Latin America North and Latin America South, each with its competitive scene independent from the other. The first tournaments that were held in the first part of the year were held online. In the middle, the closing season, that is the second split of the year, the teams moved to gaming houses next to the Riot Game offices that were established before in Santiago de Chile and Ciudad de Mexico in Mexico. 2015 year was the appearance of the gaming house with the help of Riot Game. Gaming houses were a great challenge for Latin Americans, and it came mainly because of how organizations were before that. Before 2015, organizations like Team LoL Cave, PEX and such were more or less like Facebook groups or community-driven enthusiasts that tried to gather the community of LATAM and then tried to transition that into professional teams. 5 players that played really well the game. They mainly were friends because teams were not selected by coaches or such. They were player formed and player managed mainly. So in 2015, when professional organizations needed to take over the CEOs of that organization, were the gamers of the first era of the mid-1990s and early 2000s that comprehended the business and the importance of esports as an entertainment for the next era. It was clear that the owners at that time didn't have the experience in management and business to run organizations, so the first gaming houses were a real mess in terms of the player care, and this happened all over the world. So there were 2 or 3 cases of teams that were similar to a Tainted Minds case, like food was missing, players were mistreated in certain conditions, contracts were not clear, and players were also not capacitated to go and co-live with other players. If you had to take a picture of players at that era, there were players that it was its first job, and also its first job was previously a game, but their activity transitioned from being a game that requires certain skills and little to no responsibilities to be a professional esports player that require responsibilities, require communicative skills to tell other people things in a certain way, and players didn't have those skills. So the first gaming houses were messy. Also, in the first half of that year, coaches were not considered at all. In the first 6 months of gaming houses, let's say, coaches, the figure of the coach started really to influence teams and organizations. Also, coaching staff were only the coach, because before that there were none. And it's clear that to train a League of Legends teams is one person certainly not enough. So in 2015, in the opening cup, Lion Gaming and Chaos Latin Gamers won their respective tournaments. Chaos Latin Gamers then went to the international wildcard, but it ended up last in the qualifications. In the closing cup, we had again Chaos Latin Gamer and Lion Gaming as the winners of each region. In the qualifications, again Chaos Latin Gamer won. Although it was held in Chile, Pain Gaming was who reigned supreme and qualified to the 2015 World Championship. In 2016, analysts got into place or start being considered among teams, but we have to put the glass here in the development of the teams. Obviously, the team with the most resources were struggling a little bit still with the gaming houses, so that not happened like in North America, where teams invested a bunch of money in gaming houses to sell the spot to teams that tried to qualify to the most important league that was held by Riot Games at the time, were developing online. Also, tools for coaching online were not ideal. There were few people who had the hardware to make video conferences and to share bots to view together. And also, as I said before, players also struggle with the hardware to play properly. So although there were cases where teams promoted to the first division, there were very few cases where teams could equal the level of the teams that they had gaming houses. So in 2016, Isurus Gaming and Lion Gaming both went to the International Wildcard Invitational for the Mid-Season Invitational, but both had a poor showing. There, they ended up 7th and 8th from 8 teams. For the World Championship, there was another tournament that was called International Wildcard Qualifier that was assisted by Chaos Latin Gamers and Lion Gaming. And again, this story is very well known because Lion Gaming ended first in the group stage, but in the finals he could not win again Albus Nox Luna, the first wildcard team to qualify outside the world's group stage. Although Lion Gaming was a very high team going to this tournament, he could not fulfill the objective to be the first Latin American team to go to the World Cup. In 2016, in terms of the league was stable. 6 teams in Latin America South, 6 teams in Latin America North. But Riot Games in 2017 made a decision to expand that basis. LAN and LAS decided different on how to select those teams. Latin America South decided to incorporate teams one by one from the promotion tournament. There were 6 teams on the opening season for 2017 and 7 teams for the closing season, reaching 8 teams in the start of 2018. But Latin America North incorporated 2 teams in the opening season of 2017. This was an edition that we will discuss when we reach this year, 2019. But there was a pattern there that Riot Games wanted to expand its boundaries outside 16. Then the 2017, there was a wildcard invitational for the mid-season invitational that was held. Both Isurus Gaming and Lion Gaming could not qualify to the final stage. And for the World Championship that year, the play-in stage was introduced, so there was no wildcard for the World Cup in 2017, but the play-in stage in which Lion Gaming again could qualify for the definitive match versus Cloud9 to be part of 2017 World Cup. They ended losing in that state 3-0. Then we moved to 2018. That was last year. Last year again there were 8 teams on both leagues. They maintained stable. There was a huge improvement in 2017 and 2018 in the challenger scene, where better conditions were given to players. Some players reached contracts that were not common outside Riot Games held competitions before 2017 or 2018. Still, the majority of the teams didn't play for contracts but played for prize money that was divided with the organizations that gave the name to the teams. And in the international scene, we had both playing stages for the mid-season invitational and for the World Cup. Chaos Latin Gamers and now Rainbow 7, that was the old Lion Gaming, rebranded because there was a conflict of interest between two people, and the old Lion Gaming was forced to rebrand. Were not able to pass the group stage of that playing stage. And in the last World Cup, it was the first time that the Lion Gaming bar Rainbow 7 team didn't go to an invitational in the international, but Infinity Esports could pass the group stage, and they went versus G2 Esports, in which they lost the series 3-1. Chaos Latin Gamers again couldn't go out of the group stage of the playing region. In 2019, Riot decided to merge again the two regions into one Latin America to optimize their work in between the offices in Santiago and in Mexico. So teams had to make an application to Riot Games to be part of this new Liga Latin America, this unified Liga Latin America that will take place in 2019. Still, this at first glance is viewed like a shrink, like a merge. It's not really like that, because parallel with this shrinking Riot management over the Latin American League, there was an expansion in all the region with the arrival of League of Video Games Professional, company which I work now as a shoutcaster, that also opened offices in England with the Forge of Champions. LVP open offices in Argentina, Chile, Colombia and Mexico, and will hold professional national leagues in those countries, similar to what are the leagues that qualify to the European Master. Still, these leagues will have an access. They will not be 2 promotions and relegations per year anymore, as it used to be. There will be only one that will be at the end of the year. The representation to play in that tournament will be awarded by LVP conducted tournaments. So we can say that in terms of number of teams, the region expanded again from 16 teams that were divided in Riot managed leagues in Latin America South and Latin America North to 40 teams that now are 8 teams managed by Riot Games directly in Chile, and 32 other teams that are managed by LVP in a partnership with Riot Games. It is expected that LVP teams reach in a couple of years, let's say a year, to maximum the level of the Latin American League. So I see this process as an expansion that could bring more opportunities and definitely more competition to the Latin America League of Legends Esports. Again, if you didn't know the history of Latin America, thanks you so much if you watch up to here in the video. If you did, please subscribe to this channel or follow me in my social media, that is Oxaciano in all social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. This series in YouTube, that will be the only series in English. I will consider doing other content, but for now it will be the only English series. Again, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in another chapter of Against the Odds.